name is Janell Nelson. Well, my discipline primarily is graphic design. That's what I have my degree in, but I actually started school in business and then switched to fine arts. So made a pretty big swing there, and then decided to close out with graphic design, which is kind of like a hybrid for me, but just the way I naturally think and just my skills. But I love fine arts. I love painting and sculpture specifically.
So what'd you start doing? Like when you was a kid, like what'd you start doing?
I really love writing, actually. And I love quiz, but I also loved art class. And oddly, like science fair season too. So I don't know, I was just really big on like presenting and talking, I think. But just communication. I feel like that was a thread. So it, revolving around communication. And so really, I was the A student. I was the geek that really liked school. And I went to school in Englandwood. It's one of the shuttered Chicago public schools now, so it's closed, but had some amazing, profoundly impactful teachers who really went above and beyond just teaching us lessons, and they really kind of took care of us. So that was school. That was like grammar school. I went to high school to Whitney Young, Magnet High, and it was also an extremely fulfilling experience because at the time it was incredibly diverse. It was far away from home. I had to commute over an hour to get to school in high school because of the way the city is segregated and the way opportunities are chunked out. But in doing so, just ended up having friends from all over, right? And so that really expanded my worldview and my understanding and just feeling of ownership of the city. Started cutting my teeth with the art discipline in publishing world. Wow. And that was, and specifically educational publishing. So that was like my niche for quite a few years. So I did that for a little while, and then decided to leave on my own. I was already freelancing on my own anyway for like a 9-to-5 job, which over time grew to be more like 10 to like 9 at night sometimes, because it was just like, how deadlines are and stuff. And then go home and on the weekends still be working on like my own client stuff. So after a few years of doing that, the client work kept building, and it got to a point where I was just like, well, there's many reasons, but one reason why I decided to leave was I just wanted to bet on myself. I felt like there was no reason for me to just keep in. If I'm going to be a superhero, I might as well just do it all for me, as opposed to like giving all of my sweat equity to someone else that didn't appreciate it as much, but also wanting to like directly have more autonomy and control over the audiences I was working with and for.
When you started into the creative field, like how was your support system?
In a personal way, fine. I think in general, family members were just like glad that I was just doing something in school. I will say graphic design specifically is something where most folks think they have an idea or they have no idea. And especially older generation Black folks, it's a very, like a lot of professional disciplines, the higher up you get into it, there isn't a whole lot of representation. And so I think in my personal, like familial circles, it was like, what do you do again, baby? Oh, okay, you make posters, but it was still supportive. It was just a lack of like true understanding of all that was going on in terms of just like support systems in a more structural sense, not many.
Wow.
I was the darkest person, and I'm light skinned. Let's just put it on the table. I was the darkest person in my office for a decade, aside from like the doorman and there was one accountant in an accountant department, but in my department, I was the only Black person. And that's when I left. That's throughout my publishing career. Even then, when I left and worked with a smaller, privately owned contracted firm. And so when I was there at the contracted firm, at that point in my career, I did have a higher position. So I did have some hiring power. So I was able to hire and bring on some junior designers, and some freelancers. Whenever we had to source freelancers or interns, I wanted to make sure that I gave people of color opportunity to apply. And if they were equally yoked with someone else or showed promise, I brought them on. So that was like my little itty bitty contribution. It still wasn't making I felt like substantial change in the org, but
What is still one of the lessons you learned about yourself?
That confidence and hubris are not the same thing. And it's really easy to learn that, and I'm still learning. So let's just be clear, right? Let's just put that out there. All are standing on tectonic plates that are constantly moving. So it's like, I don't feel like I'm at a point where, oh yes, I have done it. Like, no. But I have learned that I am absolutely capable of holding my own and manifesting things in a way that is unique to me, that is still valuable. Really easy to get caught in like the comparison game and the should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And I've learned that there's a million ways to exist, and you can really define yourself for yourself. Like I say graphic designer because that's like the easiest title to apply. But like, I do a lot of graphic design, but that is actually not even primarily how I'm functioning. I mean, I realize now that the way I'm working is really an organic hybrid of like business. I mean, I do a lot of stuff with EAC behind the scenes that's not easily Instagrammable, right? It's not easy to show. I just got three artists. One artist that's a co-founder, and then two that's like affiliated with us, placed in like a immersive art experience downtown. And that was just really fulfilling. It's like, I'm not in there painting, but I was like really excited to get these like 3 Black artists in this space in River North for this event where people are going to, like, tourists are going to be coming. And so I'm really, I don't know if you want to call that like the artist management space. I don't even like managing artists. That's not what I'm doing either. You know what I'm saying? But I say that to say, I've learned that if you lean into what feels good and you lean into what feels right, and if you just kind of get into your flow and do whatever works for you and the way your brain works and whatever your fingers and your gifts are, just own that shit and be okay with it. Sometimes it's really hard. I know artists, we tend to be so hard on ourselves. Ugh. And I have to say this to myself too sometimes. It's like, it's okay. Like, what I did today was really good. And it's all right if like only 3 people know about it, like, or no one knows about it. Like, this is, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I think it's also as I get older, you kind of lean into more like DGAF-ness. So it's like, I'm just going to do what feels good and attract what's meant for me. And it's been working. Things are still loopy and crazy because that's life, right? I have a 3-year-old at home, so everything's like all the time. So yeah.
What has consistency taught you?
What has consistency taught me? Mm-hmm. Consistency yields results.
What are one of the hurdles that you had to overcome?
I'm still overcoming it. I think the whole term work-life balance is a joke. Well, it's not a joke. It's a constant thing. You could have a balanced afternoon and then an unbalanced evening. You could have a balanced tomorrow and then the next day everything's out of whack. I think it's a constant exercise. One of my hurdles is figure out what is the right cocktail of different buckets for me, right? There's family life, there's extended family needs, there's obligations to others you might be connected to and related to that you see as obligations. There's the way you choose to divide your day. Self-care, and what does that look like? Just figuring out like what percentage, like how much time am I going to spend on this week? That's a constant hurdle. And I think that it's just something that is part of the landscape. You just have to constantly kind of like work around it or crawl over it and figure it out or work through it. People get sick that you might love.
When you're working for someone else, when you have a boss, it's sometimes easier to kind of pin your actions on an obligation and say, oh, well, I got to do this because I work for this job. When you work for yourself, it's a whole other mental thing where it's like, okay, do I take this time off? I really can't afford it because I have these, it's like you have to kind of assert your values for yourself and work on communicating. And that's something that I'm constantly working on.
The expectations you need to let go of?
That's a good question. The expectation that I need to let go of, that actually I'll say I have let go of, is the expectation to just constantly show.
Oh, girl.
So I am proud to say I share what I can when I feel like sharing. But you can't, if you're always sharing, you're not doing. And so when there's a whole bunch of stuff to do, it doesn't, Gen Z, maybe they mastered it, but I haven't gotten to the point, or I haven't figured out the code to like constantly let people in on the process, because when I'm focused on doing something, I'm just in it, right? And so I just let it go. It's like the right people will see you. And sometimes it's not about being seen, just see yourself. So yeah.
What inspires you to keep going?
Other artists and my clients.
What, I feel like everybody has their definition of success. So what does success mean to you personally?
It means being proud of the work that I'm doing and simultaneously having enough liquid to move how I want to move in life. So if I want to be able to go on the trip, the fact that I don't have to like scrape pennies to do that. If my kid needs something, the fact that I can just make that. We're not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. Knowing that by working in the creative field and leaning into artistry and just the way my brain works, I'm able to not focus on money, but know that I'm able to get paid for it in ways that that can sustain my life is success for me.
What are the sacrifices you had to make?
I've had to sacrifice time, I think. My journey was really kind of like an artistic corporate one, because I was snatched so quick out of school, like right when I graduated, I went straight into working for a company. I don't want to say lost. I think that come to the point now was just like a lot of time spent learning about like what felt right. I spent a lot of years doing the 9-to-5 and then some years doing the 9-to-5 and working on my own freelance. I remember when I was in college, a lot of the art I was doing was just like with the stereotypical artist with like a messy room with paint and canvas. And I loved like crayons and charcoal. So my fingers were always dirty. And I leaned more into the digital side because that was just so exciting and fulfilling. And it still is. But I definitely had to make some choices. And I sacrificed, because I don't come from generational wealth, I had to make some choices about like, okay, security versus being a starving artist. And I chose security early in my career because I just I knew that if I weren't able to pay my rent, I wouldn't be able to pay my rent, right? So and I think it's worked for me, but I will say that was a sacrifice. Now I absolutely have more freedom to do what I want. But in the beginning, I had to make a choice to just do what you must so you could eventually do what you want, right? So yeah.
What has been important to your art? Like, what do you want people to see in the things that you do?
To define what my art is now, I will say my art is the ways I'm able to support impactful endeavors. So, for example, I'm working with a client. I'm helping them design a manifesto brief that focuses on challenging the ways philanthropic entities support Black people. And so the work that they're doing is profound. And I'm honored to be able to take what they're doing and translate it into a visual way that makes it digestible for folks, right? So that's part of my artistry. But also my artistry is, I'm really excited about some of the stuff that EAC is doing by way of amplifying other artists. And so while it's not necessarily my art hanging on the wall, I see that as part of my artistry, and that I'm able to be behind the scenes to like help. If I can write a grant that gets funding that I can funnel to other people, that's creative, right? So if that's how I'm defining my art, I think that the art itself is answering the question.
What a part of the process you had to learn to love?
I had to learn to love so now I'm going to talk specifically about graphic design. I had to learn to love the production side of it. There's different ways to be a graphic designer. There's so many ways. That is such a broad umbrella term, because you could call yourself a graphic designer and you could just be a digital artist and just makes this like a really dope digital illustrator. And that is a graphic artist. You could be a graphic designer that's a typography nerd and really loves like letter forms. It creates their own fonts and does some interesting thing with typecases. And like, there's a whole rabbit hole you can go down if you research people that create, it's like lettering artists using in like page layout. And so I cut my teeth with a lot of like page layout and like magazine layout and publishing stuff. And it was really exciting. And I had to learn to love the production side of it, because me being a Gemini, sometimes I get really flighty and it's like, oh, here's this thing. Oh, don't it look good? Okay, boom, on to the next. And it's like, okay, yeah, you made this concept. Now you have to apply it to these 20 different chapter openers or these like different editions, or it's like, you can't run away from this. Or it's like, now we have to put this in the press and print. We got to do a press check. And we have to like figure out the right CMYK codes. We have to check the gradients. We have to like, so there's a lot of like math involved with, you know, measuring and making sure that, you know, is this the right dimensions for this box? We may have to scale it up 30% on this side, or bring, you know, I'm good at it now because I forced myself to just learn. So yeah, I had to learn to love technical stick-to-itiveness of design. Sometimes I just want to design a brochure or an interesting packaging solution and then just pass it off to someone else and say, okay, go make it happen. Here's the concept. But you know, sometimes you need to check your work. So yeah. And
what's your advice to the fellow creatives? What is your advice you have for them?
So one is, you really, this sounds so cliche. So you really do have to believe in yourself. Believe in yourself, you do. But here's something that's interesting that I've been realizing, especially now that I've been, particularly in the last couple of years, hiring a lot of juniors and working with a lot of students and interns. It's this weird balance, and I don't even know how to describe it, but you have to believe in yourself, but acknowledge that you do not know it all and you never will. You have to constantly be open to growing. Also, though, know that you don't know it all, but then it's like, don't doubt your capability. See it on both sides constantly. And sometimes it's split across gender identifying roles, which is interesting too. So I noticed that sometimes femme identifying folks and women doubt themselves or play themselves down in interviews a little bit. And it's like, stop apologizing. Don't walk in a room saying, well, I know this isn't the best, but here, like, you're explaining to me your portfolio and you're like making disclaimers. It's like, don't open with a disclaimer. Like, tell me how dope you are and what you did to make this successful. And, you know, be open to the fact that you can like improve upon it in the future. And then I've also seen the other side where sometimes folks come to the table thinking this is like, yeah, you know, I did this and, you know, I made this happen. It's like, okay, this is cool, but, you know, are you open to like growing a little bit? So it's a really hard balance. I will say, believe in yourself, but know that this is a big world and there's always room to grow, but there's also space for you. You just have to figure out like what your exact skill is, because like I said, there's so many different ways to be a designer. Like, you could be a really great logo maker. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to design campaigns. You don't have to worry about copywriting and marketing and ads, and you don't have to do animation. Or you just do animation and you're known for that. Like, that's amazing too, right? And just know that you're not gonna have it figured out right away. You might not have it figured out in 5 years or 10 years, and that is okay. Other advice that I have is like, don't focus on money. And this is someone who, you know, talked a lot about money during this call, but don't let money be your sole motivating factor. And I don't think a lot of artists exist that way, but I know that life is real and sometimes you do have to make choices. And so try to keep the long picture. If you take a job where because it's paying well, that's okay. Just know that, you know, maybe there's something to learn from this job, and maybe that fuels and funds the next project that's more hard work, you know? Don't beat yourself up because you're going through a season. Like, just acknowledge big picture shit. Like, okay, for the next 2-3 months, I took on this project with this company. Don't compromise your morals too much, but you know, if it's something that's not that exciting, that might be okay. Just push through, because at the end of that 3 months or the end of that 6-month contract, you've learned some skills that maybe you created something that you don't want to put in your portfolio. Maybe you just hate the designs that you made for whoever you're working for, right? But maybe you learned something. Maybe you learned some soft skills. Maybe your email or your communication game got a lot stronger. We're able to sit in some meetings where you're able to present yourself a little bit better. Like, just be open to expanding beyond whatever your artistry is, and be okay with the choices that you make. Because as long as you're still here, you know, it's infinite possibilities. So yeah.
I felt that. Sure. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.